Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered. With your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology prospecting method. I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. And today we have a very special guest. We have Heather Pearce Campbell, who is the principal of the Legal Website Warrior. And Heather is a warrior mama. She is a nature lover. She is a dedicated attorney and legal coach for world-changing entrepreneurs. She's based in Seattle. She's a mom to two little wild munchkins, and she is the founder of Pearce Law PLCC, which is home to her legal practice. She's also the creator of the Legal Website Warrior, which is an online business that provides legal education and support to information entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, online educators, speakers, and authors around the U.S. and the world. And this is an interesting little tidbit. Heather hoards information, paper, and books while secretly dreaming of becoming a minimalist. And I just hoard information, paper, and books. But she also relishes an occasional rare night with her hubby when the kiddos are miraculously asleep and she can soak up HGTV without guilt. Heather is the host of Guts, Grit, and Great Business podcast, Spirit of Full Disclosure. I have been a guest on the Guts, Grit, and Great Business podcast, and I'm also a client. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Wendy. So good to see you again. And yes, you were a guest on Guts, Grit, and Great Business. And so if folks are listening, we should actually share the link over for that conversation. People can pop over as well and join us there.
Absolutely. We will put it in the show notes.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I was looking at your website this morning in preparation for our conversation today, and you have such an interesting backstory. So how did you become the Legal Website Warrior?
Well, yeah, there is a little bit of a backstory, I think, as there often is in entrepreneurship. For me, there's a couple I would consider major influences in my past. One is that I was raised by a dad who was an entrepreneur. And so really grew up watching entrepreneurship firsthand, watching my dad's businesses, working in those businesses, doing all kinds of things, behind the scenes to like observe and learn about small businesses. And that was I think that was really a path that my personality in particular enjoyed. I was also kind of a more serious kid. I know part of the story I tell on my website is about a talk I got when I was 5 years old, where my dad sat me down and said, look, if you want to go to college or, get an advanced degree, you're going to have to pay your way there. So you either have to get really good grades or save all your money or somehow figure out a path to get yourself through school. And that came about, and there were 6 of us, right, that all got that talk. And so all 6 of us, had the job of figuring out how we were going to get ourselves through school. And the backstory to that was that my dad was one of 11, and he had a dad that promised him he would pay for school if he grew up working on the ranch and doing all these things, which he did. And then when it came time for him to go off to college, his dad couldn't afford to pay. So he ended up joining the railroad and doing some things to get himself through school. And I think as a young father, he felt a fear around like, I can't make promises that I can't deliver on. I don't know if I can deliver on this. So my kids are just going to be responsible for their own schooling. And it just meant that when I was pretty young, 7, 8 years old, I was walking neighborhoods, knocking on doors, asking to rake leaves and do odd jobs. Like I really started saving and thinking about money very, very young, and had multiple paper routes, second, third grade, odd jobs, was always looking for work and odd jobs as a kid. And then fast forward and graduating high school and going off to college, first of all, I got scholarshiped. And so I'd worked really hard in school as well, but I had so much money saved in the bank. And I had invested in old automobiles, and I ended up buying a collectible car that later would pay for part of my law school experience. And so, I just had a lot of interest when it came to money. And luckily, I had a dad who was also willing to be in that conversation and constantly have that conversation with me. And so, it was an interesting childhood, I would say. And from a young age, like 10 or 12, we became responsible for half of all of our clothing and then 100% of all of our extracurriculars, right? So if we wanted to go to the movie with friends, or we wanted to, do anything fun or buy extra things, that was on us to figure out how to do that. So it just meant that I got an education much younger. People, I think, are usually getting this type of education, at least nowadays, in their adult lives, right?
That is true.
Yes. And so for me, entrepreneurship started young. And then when I was in law school, unfortunately, my mom passed away very young. And so she was diagnosed with terminal cancer my first year of law school, which really dramatically changed my paradigm, not only about time, but about like the willingness to do other people's work. And so what it meant is that when I graduated law school, I did not take a traditional path. And most people really get funneled down either into like big law, maybe you go to a small firm, or government work, right? That's it. Like that, those were really the main options. And those weren't appealing to me. Neither of those. I didn't want to be told what to do. I didn't want to be, put in a corner cubicle and draft cell phone tower leases all day, which is what some of my friends went off to do. Those were not interesting options. And so when I graduated law school, I started my own practice right out of law school. And I had taken a class my third year of law school called Issues in Solo Practice. And it was taught by people who were running their own solo practices. And it was completely contrary to what anybody else was doing at that time. But it was the path for me. And it really set me on a really interesting early career path.
That is a truly amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. So the name of this podcast is Salesology: Conversations with Sales Leaders. And you're an attorney. So I am sure that there are people listening today, people in our audience that are saying, hey, Wendy, why are you interviewing an attorney? What does that have to do with increasing sales in a business? And I have my own thoughts about that, but I'm going to turn it over to you as the expert.
Totally. Well, what's the thing? What are the two functions that every business does, right? Marketing and sales. All of us are actually in the marketing and sales business. We just happen to be selling our own service or our own product, whatever it is. So those two primary functions are massive. And I tell people there's pretty much not anything that you can do, including marketing and sales in your business, that don't have legal ramifications, and sometimes pretty significant ones, right? So I work with businesses that are selling, small products and services all the way up to, $20,000, $25,000, $50,000 services and products. And if you think that there are not legal ramifications involved in handling the sales process the wrong way, right? There are. My clients live the results of that every day. And so we end up getting in and really diagnosing where systems break down, how legal can actually support their sales enrollment process, can support their marketing, can support having clear communication around things, support improving or possibly creating for the first time their business policies, right? So there's a lot that we talk about in relation to sales.
So I know that a lot of people, and this used to be me, in the spirit of full disclosure, this used to be me. Business owners that say, oh, I'm just a small business. Like, what kind of problems could I possibly have? Who's going to come after me? I'm just a small business. And I kind of learned the hard way. But again, I'll turn this over to you, Heather, as the expert.
Well, that's true. And so often I hear that from clients because guess what? All of my clients are technically small businesses. And just in case you're listening and you, like Wendy just described, are one of those that has kind of counted yourself out of needing quote unquote traditional legal support. First of all, from a statistical perspective, 99.999% of all businesses in the US are small businesses. From a numbers perspective, we are the marketplace. It's the big businesses that make the news and are in all the headlines. And ironically, that a lot of the business supports are built for, but small businesses really are the marketplace. And I think that's true around the world. And yet, because of smaller budgets, smaller teams, just less capacity, small businesses have a much harder time getting their needs across the board met, including their legal needs. And so, but actually the whole reason why I built the legal website Warrior, which is a second business to my legal practice, Pearce Law, which is based here in Seattle, Washington, was to create technically an alternative legal service provider model that competes with the regular marketplace, but delivers legal support in a much more accessible, unique way to small businesses that are working on smaller budgets and can't afford to go to an attorney to get all their legal needs met. So I have a huge heart for small businesses and their budgets, and I still believe there are ways that we can get our needs met.
So I was reading on your website that you feel that a lot of small businesses are taken advantage of. And I'm assuming you mean taken advantage of because they don't have that legal support. So could you give us some examples of ways that businesses can be taken advantage of that, impacts their bottom line?
Oh, totally. And it happens regularly. And even for folks who ran businesses for years pre-COVID and thought, really, I've had like a few little skirmishes, nothing big. Suddenly they were having people show up with chargeback requests, right? Why? Because their budgets were pinched. People were, under all kinds of pressure during COVID. And a lot of times, and people know this is the problem, is that consumers and even other businesses, like if you're B2B and you're working with other small businesses, they know that they can get money back if there are not solid terms around the sale, that you can simply file a chargeback request or make a complaint or do something to threaten that small business. And in a lot of circumstances, easily get your money back. And that's if the small business has not taken the steps to put some simple but really important protections in place. So that's one example, but it happens regularly. And usually it looks like an email threat, filing a chargeback request directly to the credit card company without even talking to the small business, saying something about, making a claim about the service. And let me be clear, sometimes clients have legitimate complaints, right? But oftentimes when somebody is seeking just to get all their money back, they will exaggerate, they'll make up a claim, they will say it wasn't delivered as promised, or for whatever reason, I wasn't able to consume the service or product. And so therefore, because I never participated, I should get my money back, these kinds of things.
I had a conversation with a prospect last week who was asking about the pricing in one of our programs. And this particular program has a 30-day money-back guarantee. And there's also a payment plan, a monthly payment plan. And so he wanted to know in great detail about the guarantee and when he could get his money back, and could he do the monthly payment, and then if he liked the program, up it to the full payment, which gives him a discount. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure this is somebody I want to work with.
Yes. You have just described one of the red flags that I talk about in watching for and spotting both red flag clients and red flag scenarios, right? So there's both. And red flag clients will give you those signs even before they purchase. And usually it looks like asking for special accommodations, asking for a payment method, payment plan, some alternative workaround that's not something that you've offered, asking for extra time, exploring every last detail of your policy. These are all examples of some potential red flag client actions even before they buy.
Absolutely. And so could you talk a little bit about the importance of having business policies? Like, what does that mean?
Yes, absolutely. So business policies, when I think about marketing and sales as a system, right? These are things that work together. And when you look at the systems in your business, really they're a series of, for many of them that are outward facing, a series of touch points that you're having with a client or potential client. And your business policies can be one additional touch point where you have an opportunity to educate your clients in advance of working with you, right? Which helps to properly set client expectations. And the way to minimize confusion and decrease disputes in your business is to properly set client expectations, right? And how do we do this? In all of our communication touch points. So everything from the initial language that you're using in your marketing, whether that's, through online channels, whether it's live from a stage, whether it's through, an email newsletter, whichever ways you're accomplishing those initial touch points, looking at that as the start of a conversation where you have an opportunity to be clear at each point about the experience that someone might have with you. And then also, in moving along to the point where they would be exposed to your business policies, let's pretend that they show up to your website because they're starting to explore a service or whatever. You have the opportunity to use your business policies as a way to reinforce the clarity of that language, but make certain rules clear that are not only beneficial for your business. The thing about business policies, if they're done well, they're drafted from a client perspective, meaning that you can improve the client experience through business policies that also work to support and protect your business. And again, one more way for you to reinforce, especially somebody that might show up later and cause a problem for you, like, oh, well, here we have our business policies posted, especially if you're sharing them somewhere in that conversation. And then, here you agreed to the terms at the point of the sale. And then here, when you joined the program or the course, you got the reminder. All of this language can be consistent to not only properly set expectations, but the other thing I educate my clients on is you actually have the opportunity to help create the kind of client that shows up and does business with you. You can shape them through that education.
And one of the things that I think is really important is that you don't know what you don't know. And as I said before, I was certainly guilty of, what kind of problems am I going to have? I'm a small business. And I didn't know all the things that might happen. Until they actually happened.
Well, that's right. And even for people, let's pretend you're like, well, yeah, but I'm not in the range of selling $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. Like, what's the impact? Well, even the impact around a sale that's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 is, if you've taken that money, you've either utilized it in your business or transferred it, to your personal bank account, whether you're paying yourself salary or however you're managing your money on the back end of your business. And hopefully you've got systems around that. But even with a client in that range, and let's pretend that you've gone 6 months or almost 6 months, maybe even a year, if they're on a payment plan, into the delivery of that service or program. And then somebody raises a refund request or a chargeback and they win, guess what? You are now out of pocket the time and the involvement that it takes to deliver the program or service, but somebody else could have had that spot, right? And then you have to go through the expense of dealing with a chargeback, which it can be really time consuming. I've helped walk clients through that, and it can be terribly stressful and time consuming for them to go through that process. And then at the end, if you don't have what you need to protect your position, you can just end up having to fork that money back over to the client. So it is expensive. It can really be a problem for small businesses that go through this multiple times.
Yes, and we don't get a lot of chargebacks, but I do know that the credit card company will claw that money back before it is settled. So whatever $1,000, $2,000, whatever it was, it is coming out of your bank account until
that's right.
It's settled.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And I had clients for the first time that were reaching out to me and they weren't clients yet. Let's be clear that I hadn't worked with them yet, but they reached out to me during the pandemic, and some of them were dealing with $20,000 chargebacks, $6,000 chargebacks, where suddenly they had to come up with that money because it needed to go sit in an account while this dispute was being resolved.
Yes. So we're going to pause here for a moment for a word from our sponsor, but then when we come back, Heather, because the name of this podcast is Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders, I want to talk a little bit about how legal can support sales and the sales process. So now a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. Just about every guest that I have interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. So what we've done is we've taken all those gifts and we have put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it's packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts, and also our special guest today, Heather Pearce Campbell. And we add another gift every single week. When we release a podcast, we add a gift. So you can log in as often as you'd like. You can download as many gifts as you'd like. It's all free. So go to bit.ly/gift vault, or the link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. So go to the notes, click on the link, download your gifts. You'll be glad you did. And I am back with my special guest, Heather Pearce Campbell, who is the legal website warrior. And so Heather, let's talk sales. How can legal support sales? Why is it important to think about this in terms of selling, revenue generation, etc.?
Yeah, it's a huge conversation. So let me first describe what I see when it's going wrong, right? So usually what I see when it's going wrong is somebody is inserting legal, whether it's a legal contract or, legal terms or something, at the wrong point in the conversation or far too late, right? We'll call it like 11th hour, jamming in the terms or the contract or something. It's not, they have not stepped back and designed a process that really supports the client experience and supports putting proper protections in place for their business. So how do you do this the right way? Because if you're doing it wrong, first of all, often I see people sending over terms or exposing folks to the legal requirements of the program or service that they've purchased after the sale. They're not actually, the client is not getting exposure to all the terms that they have to sign off on before they even buy. So what can happen is even in high-end programs, like let's say $20,000, $25,000 programs, I've seen this where the small business is having somebody sign up, make a deposit, or even make a full payment towards the program. And then they send over like, oh, by the way, here's the contract that we need you to sign before we can get started, right? And if you're listening and going, oh, shoot, That's me. First of all, don't feel bad. A lot of people have been doing it this way and just don't realize that that's technically a bait and switch approach. If somebody is at the point, it's a little bit like going to a car lot and you're getting ready to buy a car and you give them $20,000 for that car, and then they shove the contract in your face about all the things they're not responsible for, right? You would never do that. Of course, you'd want to see the paperwork before you actually pay a car lot $20,000 for a vehicle or whatever it is nowadays, $40,000. So just slow down with your process. Think through from the standpoint, if I were the client or the customer going through this process, first of all, what is the key information that, like, from my perspective, they don't necessarily need to know all the information in advance. There's going to be some regular terms in your, either let's call it terms of purchase or your client contract, that they don't need to be exposed to in advance. But what are the make it or break it terms? Because most businesses have some of those where, clients do really need to know certain things. So one of the things, Wendy, you mentioned is like, is there a refund policy, right? Is there a time frame associated with the service or the product? What is the pricing? Is it a payment plan? Is it all up front? There are key terms that people will need to know about. Those should all be disclosed up front. And then anything else related to the service or the program that could cause a red flag scenario in your business, right? So, and there's, the list is long about what those could be, but it's why I build really protective documents for my clients that allow them to make proper disclosures in advance of the sale. And there's a couple ways that you can achieve what's called constructive notice, because then somebody's like, all right, how do I do this the right way at the right time? You want to achieve what's called constructive notice, which means that at or immediately before the point that somebody's giving you money for whatever it is you're selling, if there are terms in place, and it's different if you're like a hardware salesman and you've got a brick and mortar business, this is a totally different conversation because clearly somebody's, just at your counter purchasing what they need. They've got their receipt, they leave. We're talking about any services or products where there's some additional strings attached, right? You've got to make proper disclosures, and you have to have what's called constructive notice, where people sign off on the legal terms before they pay you. There's full disclosure of what applies to that scenario before they give you money. And this is how you avoid somebody coming to you afterwards and being like, oh, I didn't know about this. I need my money back. You're like, no, you checked the box before you paid. You checked the box, which gave you access to the terms, right? Because the terms are going to be hyperlinked. Or let's pretend you have a client service agreement where somebody's actually putting a signature on that, whether that's in person, whether that's digital, right, through HelloSign, DocuSign, one of those services. You've got something that says, nope, you read or you had the opportunity to read here all of the rules that apply to this purchase. And so it just allows you a much stronger position as a business to not have people be wiggling out and just suddenly demanding their money back because they did not get proper disclosures ahead of the time that they gave you money.
So I'm curious about something, because this is something that I, as a business owner, have struggled with, and I have been on the receiving side, and I have also been on the side of needing to send out that legal document. And I'll give you a very concrete example. I got a proposal from a vendor. It was 2 pages long. It was, we're going to do this, and this. It was all the bullet points. You're going to pay this. We want you to agree to 3 months, and after that, it's month to month. It all seemed pretty reasonable. There was a place for me to sign. She had already signed it. I had a conversation with her, and I said, "Okay, yeah, I'm good to go. Do you want me just to sign and scan and email that back to you?" And she said, "I'll send you a DocuSign." It was 30 pages long. And so what is, and I didn't sign it, by the way. I mean, she got in touch with me the next day and said, "I thought you were ready to go." And I said, no, I have to send to my attorney. So what's the middle ground here between having that document where you are covered and sending someone 30 pages of legalese that they can't possibly understand, and then they have to pay somebody else to go through it and make sure everything's okay?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's a great example of what can happen around the use of legal documents in your business. And I'm a believer that our legal documents should support business happening. They should support transactions, right? So it's the reason why, like, if you go to my template store, I've got an online template store, I've got an independent contractor agreement that's a short form agreement, and I have one that's the long form agreement. The short form is going to be used for scenarios where the project overall, size-wise, time-wise, monetarily speaking, is a smaller project. Somebody's not quite as embedded into your business as with the full-length independent contractor agreement. And the reason that's important is because, just like you mentioned, if somebody's going to do, let's say a $2,000 or $5,000 project for your business, and they get a 10-page contract to sign, it might intimidate them to the point where they're like, I'm just not going to do this, and they walk away, right? Versus a 4 or 5 page contract that just has the basics, what you need, but still has you covered, right? I'm all for business happening. And the other mistake I will say that I see small businesses regularly making, and if you're one of these people, I know you'll get a laugh, saying like, could we just get this down to like 1 page, bare bones? Can I just have like a really simple 1-page document that covers this? And as an attorney, like, I always cringe and laugh a little bit at that question, because it's like, yes, oh, I wish I could do that for you. And do you want something that actually protects you? Or just, you know what I mean? Because that's the reality. The difference between bare bones, barely getting anything in, and actually having something that's protective can be, a difference of pages. So it's, while I wish that that was doable in most circumstances, if the monetary value is high enough, because here's the other thing is this, if it's let's pretend it's a couple $100 service or product, I'm far less concerned about what that's going to do to somebody's bottom line than a $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 product or service, right? There's a big difference there. And there's also a difference in the expectations from the client side. If somebody's showing up to pay you for a $200 or $300 service, do they expect to have to sign pages and pages of documents? No. Now, with the terms of purchase box, we could sneak around that a little bit from a legal perspective, meaning that most people don't click over and actually read the full documentation. So most of them don't know, was it 1 page? Was it 5 pages? Right? And even if they do, the scrolling function is a little bit deceptive. You don't know how many pages you just scrolled past. But if you're signing an actual document, which it sounds like you were, 30 pages, or it's sent through HelloSign or DocuSign or something, you're like, wow, this is substantial, right? That might be acceptable if it's a $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 service. It's far less acceptable if it's a $200 or $300 deal, right? So it's also thinking about the size of the transaction can help guide you around, is this going to be acceptable to the client? Do they expect this? The higher the value, probably. And the more sophisticated the client, probably, because they're going to expect to see documentation around that, right? But if your clients are unsophisticated, or they're, much smaller purchases, they're not expecting to have to traverse a bunch of legal stuff.
Yeah. And the other issue is that it's completely unintelligible unless you're an attorney.
It can be.
And so that in this instance that I'm describing, that's what I got. I didn't understand what the first paragraph meant.
Right.
And then it went on for 30 pages. So
no, it's true. And so, if you're listening and you're like, gosh, how do I work around this issue? My number one advice is to connect, first of all, with an attorney who understands your particular business, because they're going to also understand norms and standards in the industry. And then also connect with somebody who you just vibe with, who you're like, you know what? They get me, they get what I want. They can be supportive of my position while still working to protect my business. It's really critical that you work with the right people.
Hear, hear. So I know, Heather, that you have a gift for all of our listeners. So would you share some details about your gift?
Totally. So I have a gift that is called the Legal Basics Bootcamp. It sounds hard. It's not. It's like a little, 5-minute video per day over 5 days. And what this bootcamp does is it walks you through, I have a framework that I've developed that I walk all my clients through. And it really doesn't matter your business, doesn't matter your location. These same rules in the framework will apply to you. And so each day you're going to get an introduction to each of my 5 buckets that are part of this framework that will help you understand where are your legal needs in your business? Like, where do you look to find supports for those? And what are they? And it will, my goal really, because I feel like one of the biggest struggles that small businesses have is actually getting what I call the legal roadmap to their business. Like, what are my needs? What do I need? And how do I prioritize these legal needs? This little Legal Basics Bootcamp will give you the map, will help you prioritize. You can begin to really self-identify where you should start and make much more empowered decisions for yourself.
Okay, and we are going to post the link to the Legal Basics Bootcamp in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. And I know, actually, Heather, after reconnecting with you today and having this conversation, I'm going to go to the show notes and click on the link because I need to go through that Legal Basics Bootcamp. So,
and it's a great thing to do. I will tell you that most people on my list have actually been through it multiple times. And the reason why is because you're going to be ready to hear one thing and you'll go do that in your business. And then, businesses evolve or you have more needs. And the next time you go through it, you'll be ready to hear something else and tackle that.
Yeah. And I think certainly for me, the day-to-day and running the business and planning for the future and everything else is so all-consuming. And this is something that it's not my area of expertise. I did not think about until something happened and surprise.
Right.
So
and most people don't. So you're speaking my language because most of my clients feel the way that you feel. And it does take just every once in a while peeking into that box and deciding like, okay, what's the next thing to tackle? What's the next thing to work on? And then just literally calendaring it. When am I going to do this? Right. And if you take these baby steps over time, you'll be amazed how in a year or two, you've actually handled most of your legal needs for a small business.
Well, it starts with the Legal Basics Bootcamp. The link is in the show notes. Go to the show notes, click on the link. That's what I'm doing as soon as we are finished here. So thank you all for listening to the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast and my very special guest today, Heather Pearce Campbell, the legal website warrior. And if you have found value in listening to today's podcast, then think about one business owner, one sales professional, one entrepreneur, somebody that you know that you think might also find value in listening to this podcast, and please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.